It is the Sengoku Jidai. Besieged and surrounded by his enemies, a lord pays a group of men to see his only child to safety. But do they have the skill to ensure her safety? And can they even be trusted? For this is an age of honor and treachery, of blood and valor, of gold and steel. Now available at Amazon, Smashwords, and at studiobrainstorm.net. Links in the description. Following the formal creation of the Badger clan in the year 115, the next few decades were relatively quiet for the Emerald Empire. In the year 119, Asako Chukan, daimyo of the Asako family, completed his 7-year-long project of creating a brand new and ultra-efficient filing system for the records of the Phoenix clan. The basis of the system was that major records of information would be kept at major temples throughout Phoenix lands. Minor records would be kept at smaller minor temples, and the minor temples in turn could petition the major temples for access to the more important records. Given that the Phoenix are the most magically oriented of the great clans, this system was mostly helpful in acquiring new information regards to magic. There was just one small hiccup with all this, and it was the fact that Chukan had created the system with a lot of outside help. His administrative team included members from the Otomo and Miya families, as well as the Doji and Ikoma. Luckily, Chukan was eventually able to resolve this by persuading these outside helpers to organize themselves into a vassal family of the Asako, thus creating the Chukan vassal family. Less positive news occurred in the year 127, when Hiruma, founder of the Hiruma family and one of the last of the founding generation of the empire, passed away. He was survived by 2 children, an unnamed son who inherited his post as daimyo of the family, and a daughter, Hiruma Mai. Where almost nothing is known about her brother, Mai is mostly remembered for introducing incredibly ruthless tactics and harsh training regimens into the creation of Hiruma scouts. This makes sense if you recall the fact that as the dedicated reconnaissance specialists of the Crab Clan, the Hiruma are essentially required as part of their job description to infiltrate the mythical Japanese equivalent of Mordor and come back alive. For this, as well as for her speed and hard-hitting attacks in personal combat, Hiruma Mai became known as the Iron Hummingbird. However, her most noteworthy personality trait was the fact that Mai was a compulsive gambler and almost never turned down a wager. This ultimately came back to bite her when, one day, she caught the fancy of the daimyo of the Ikoma family. This particular Ikoma lord, whose name is unknown, challenged Mai to a wager, of which we know nothing except the condition that if he won, Mai would marry him. This, of course, is what happened, and Mai, furious at herself for getting into this situation in the first place, decided to salvage her ego by spreading a bunch of flamboyant rumors about a mysterious death on her part before quietly sneaking into Ikoma lands under a false name and marrying her new husband. The length people go to for the sake of ego. Speaking of the Crab Clan, in the year 137, the aging clan champion Hida Tekeyen, realizing that his life was about to come to an end, wished to pass on leadership of the clan to his heir. Slightly unfortunately, that heir was his granddaughter, Hida Akemi, who was not only a minor at this point still, but also unusually small for a Hida anyway, and asthmatic. And alas, while they do have magic and alchemy in Legend of the Five Rings, they have neither medication nor inhalers. However, age was really the most important issue here, and that was ultimately resolved by having Akemi arranged to marry her distant cousin Hida Kugen, who would serve as acting champion until she came of age. Eventually, Akemi did grow up and inherit leadership of the clan, and asthma aside, turned out to be a formidable warrior in combat. At least one account claims that she was the first samurai to master the barehanded fighting technique known as Kaze-do, which is a little awkward because the story of the origins of Kaze-do technically take place a lot later in the timeline, long after she supposedly died. So I'm not really going to go into that here. At any rate, the fact that this relatively diminutive woman is said to have killed a troll with her bare hands should demonstrate more than amply that, size aside, she was certainly a warrior worthy of the legacy of Hida. Unfortunately, Akemi's skill as a fighter did not quite match her skill as a general. Although there were fewer fights against the Shadowlands during her reign as clan champion, she ultimately lost far more battles against the Shadowlands than she won. The other thing about Hida Akemi is that she was insanely paranoid, to the point where she essentially saw assassins in every dark corner and she straight out refused to drink water, consuming only ginseng, green tea, and kuni potions that would supplement her waning health. In fairness to her, there were 21 different attempts on her life, made either by tainted or possessed samurai, so I guess you could say it's not really paranoia if they're actually out to get you. An ordinary paranoid person would spend all his days cowering in fear, but Hida Akemi was a crab, and they are not ordinary people by any stretch. Akemi spent her entire nights asleep with her katana hanging over her bedroll by a silk thread, and, especially when she was pregnant with her many children, she would walk around without the backplate of her armor, essentially daring people to try and backstab her. While all this was going on, Kaimetsuo, founder of the Mantis clan, passed on the leadership to his son and decided to go exploring. Unfortunately for him, this did not turn out very well, as mere months after he'd left the Islands of Spice and Silk, Kaimetsuo's ship was found adrift at sea, and the former clan champion was aboard, very much stone dead. Another odd and mysterious death occurred a few years later in 148, when the great crab artist Kuni Genai died at the age of 33. Trust me, I've looked and I can't find any details explaining how either of them died. However, there was one recent death that was perfectly explainable: the passing of the remarkably eccentric Phoenix scholar Asako Hanasaku. Born in year 98 of the Empire, Hanasaku, like many of the Phoenix clan, was dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. But his was a very specific branch of knowledge: toxicology. Much to the disgust of the cultured and high-browed of Rokugani society, Hanasaku would travel all across the empire, ingesting or otherwise exposing himself to trace elements of every possible substance in existence. Various plants, meats, blood, oil, spices, and of course, poisons. He would essentially take trace amounts of whatever poisonous substance he was working with at the time, consume it or otherwise expose himself to it, suffer the side effects, and then write down what he experienced afterward. His methods were bold and intrepid, to be sure, but unsurprisingly, they are also what killed him. One fateful day in 153, Hanasaku was testing the latest poison, this thing that would later become known as the Jin Hanasaku. A single drop was enough to send the man into convulsions, and even after he recovered, his left arm remained numb for an extended period of time. The only other detail he recorded was that the poison had tasted sour, like old rice milk. Deciding that his work was done for the day, Hanasaku decided to cleanse his mouth of the bad taste with a sip of sake. Unfortunately, the Jin Hanasaku poison was still in his system, and now it reacted in response to the alcohol in his system. Hanasaku promptly collapsed and never woke up. However, a few years earlier, in year 153, events were set in motion that would begin the creation of some of the most significant legal reforms in the history of the Emerald Empire. And this began with the 5th Emerald Tournament and the accession of the new Emerald Champion, Doji Hatsuo. Flush with his new success and position, Hatsuo decided to commemorate the occasion by commissioning the creation of a new sword, one worthy of the greatest swordsman of the Emerald Empire, and one that would symbolize the authority ever after of the Emerald Champion. 3 of the greatest blacksmiths of the Empire answered the call. Each forged a master-crafted katana. The first smith demonstrated his sword's cutting power by slicing a boulder in two with a single blow. The second chose to one-up his competitor by slicing a floating petal neatly in two with a single swipe. The third, a woman named Ashidaka, walked over to a tree and kicked it to make the leaves fall. She then held out the blade, and though the leaves fell all around her, Not a single one so much as touched the edge of her sword. The metal of the blade seemed an ever-shifting shade of green, and to Hatsuo it seemed that the sword's spirit was so strong that even insensate tree leaves knew to avoid its edge. Thus, he chose Ashidaka's blade as the blade of the Emerald Champion. With his shiny new sword at his hip, Doji Hatsuo decided to begin his tenure as Emerald Champion by going on a tour of the Empire. Unfortunately, he was not at all pleased by what he saw. The Emerald Empire of Rokugan is a feudal society. Every lord, every daimyo, and every clan champion is a law unto himself in his own land. In those days, there were judges meant to uphold imperial law, but these men were often corrupt and enforced the law capriciously to suit themselves. Upon returning to Otosan Uchi, Hatsuo expressed his concerns to the emperor, and both men agreed that something needed to be done if justice was to prevail in the empire. However, neither Doji Hatsuo nor the Emperor Genji were experts in law or legal reform. If they were going to pull this off, they would need outside help, and they found it in a most unlikely place. In Scorpion Lands, there was a small city named Taiyo One Toshi, or Sun's Edge City. From there, Hatsuo and Genji heard tales of a judge of remarkable integrity and great wisdom. His name was Soshi Saibankan, and while many thought him a little eccentric, often justifying his verdicts by referring to old parables and wives' tales, no one denied that he was a man of incomparable justice. Emperor Genji decided to confirm these rumors by attending one of Saibankan's courts in secret, and by the time the Scorpion judge had passed his verdict, the emperor was convinced that here was the man he needed. Saibankan was immediately brought to Otosan Uchi, and the emperor commanded him and Doji Hatsuo to begin the task of reforming the empire's entire judicial system. It was a task over 10 years in the doing, but at last, in the year 163, Hatsuo and Saibankan presented the emperor with their new system. The old system of judges was to be replaced by two different tiers of magistrates. The first tier were the clan magistrates. These would of course enforce the local laws corresponding to their respective clan, but above these would be the Emerald Magistrates, who would wander the land on judicial circuits enforcing imperial law. Unlike the clan magistrates, Emerald Magistrates would answer only to the Emerald Champion or to the Emperor himself. Genji was pleased with this development. But then, Hatsuo and Saibankan revealed that they had created something else, something the Emperor had not asked them to do. Obviously, there might be opposition to this new imperial system of laws. Therefore, the greatest obstacle would be the ability of the emperor to enforce the law. And while the imperial family had the Seppun family, they were bodyguards, and the great clans had armies. Clearly, if the legal reforms were to have any teeth, so reasoned Hatsuo and Saibankan, the emperor would need his own army. And thus was born the Imperial Legions. Each legion would be comprised of 5,000 men. Some of the legions would garrison the imperial capital. Others would patrol the countryside, protecting tax collectors, seeing off bandits, or responding to any military threats as they appeared. They would be loyal only to the Emerald Champion, the emperor himself, or to a shogun that the emperor could appoint at his own discretion. Should he choose to, the emperor could also place the Imperial Legions under the command of the Lion Clan Champion, acting in his capacity as right hand of the emperor. It's unknown exactly how many legions were created at this initial founding, but by the time of the Clan Wars, there would be no less than 400 legions, placing nearly 2 million warriors at the emperor's direct command. Though the first 10, the so-called Emerald Legions, were often hailed as the best of the best. Of all the events that occurred during the reign of Genji, the creation of the Emerald Magistrates and Imperial Legions are by far the most important and long-lasting. These institutions would not only survive Emperor Genji himself, but they would even survive through the brutality of the Clan Wars and every terrible conflict that followed, both mortal and mystical. Of course, these new reforms were not unopposed, and there was at least one attempt to assassinate Soshi Saibankan. One night, while he was returning home from business in Otosan Uchi, he was attacked by a gang of thugs who were apparently skilled enough to kill the trained Yojimbo set to guard him. However, Saiban Khan's reforms had been especially popular with the lower ranks of Rokugani society, and a nearby band of peasants led by a man named Nanbu saw the altercation and threw themselves into the fray, eventually managing to beat off the attackers. The grateful magistrate rewarded Nanbu and his friends by inducting them into his personal guard. Nanbu would serve Saiban Khan all his life, and after his death, his own son, also named Nanbu, would take up his father's duty. After Saiban Khan's own passing, Nanbu the Younger would serve as protector of his daughter, Soshi Sayoko. Initially, Sayoko had wanted nothing to do with this peasant's son who presumed to be her protector. However, after Nanbu the Younger nearly died uncovering a plot to poison his self-appointed mistress, Sayoko understandably changed her tune and formally acknowledged Nanbu as part of the Soshi family. Eventually, his descendants would be organized into a vassal family named the Nanbu family in his honor. For all intents and purposes, Emperor Genji was at the height of his power and glory. However, as the decades rolled by, the emperor had to watch yet again as another generation of faithful servants preceded him into death. Doji Hatsuo, the Emerald Champion, died peacefully in 183. Hida Akemi, champion of the Crab Clan, died in year 168, 5 years after the implementation of the Emerald Magistrates and the Imperial Legions. Despite her loveless marriage to Hida Kugen, Akemi had gone on to have many children and grandchildren. Alas, her health, never the best, got worse with age, and one day, while playing with her grandchildren in some autumn leaves, the clan champion suffered a final and fatal attack of asthma. Paranoid to the end, Akemi's last act in life was to stab her sword into the tree from which the leaves have fallen and hiss out that the traitor should be executed. I know what you're thinking, and yes, the tree was in fact executed. Soshi Saiban Khan, after spending many years as an Emerald Magistrate, finally retired to his home village, and, a true Scorpion at the core, would spend his last years teaching his kinsmen ways in which the new legal system he'd created could be circumvented. He died peacefully in 175, and a grateful Emperor Genji decided to honor the architect of imperial justice by declaring him the fortune of magistrates and judges, making Saiban Khan the second man in imperial history to be granted the honor of posthumous apotheosis. Unlike fortunes, however, the reigns of men, even those of semi-divine men, must eventually end. And next time, we conclude the reign of Genji.